Hello everybody, welcome back to Reading for Vocabulary. I'm Brian Stuart. We're going over Lesson 3 here. Lesson 3 is What's After 7? What's after 7? Dinner! No, we're talking about math, right? So when we talk about what's after 7, we're talking about counting, right? So did you know there is an elephant that can count? So when we talk about count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What's after 7? I don't know. Oh, right. It's 8, right? What's after 7? It's 8. Okay, so of course it depends on what you're talking about. What's after 7? Oh, dinner time. No, we're talking about math, counting. So what's after 7? It's 8. Okay, so that's what we're going to learn about in this lesson. Something very interesting about an animal, an elephant, that can count. That's very strange, right? Well, let's get right away. Let's go into the vocabulary that we need to know these words in order to study the reading passage later on. Now, the first word we have is to find something. To find something. Now, that's an interesting picture. Looks like a scuba diver just came up and he found something on the bottom of the ocean. What did he do? He discovered something. He discovered something. By the way, doesn't he look familiar? Yeah, he's a famous actor, Matthew McConaughey. Okay? Maybe you've seen him in a movie before. But in this movie, he discovered something at the bottom of the ocean. So when you find something, you discover it. Okay, next word. Whoa, we have many apples here, many green apples. There's one red apple. To change one thing for another. So let's say this person says, okay, I'm going to take the red apple and I'm going to put a green apple in its place. In this case, you could say switch. They're going to switch apples, right? So they switch this red apple, they take it out, and they put a green one in its place. That means you switched them. To switch. Okay, number 3. Oh, person's doing exercise. Can you do this exercise? It's called a push-up, by the way. That's not the word, but just so you know, this is called a push-up. Push-up. She's doing push-ups, right? You could do sit-ups, right? This is a push-up. But when you do push-ups, you don't just do one, right? You do them again. You repeat the exercise, right? So you say, I can do push-ups. 1, I'm done. No, you have to repeat, right? Do it 10 times, right? Do 1 push-up, 2 push-ups, 3 push-ups. You repeat, you do again. So when you exercise, you do the exercise again. You repeat the exercise many times. Number 4, very smart girl, right? She's going to be a chemist when she grows up. She's studying chemistry. Now, chemist, by the way, how do you say that? Chemist. Chemist. A chemist is a type of scientist. What do scientists do? They have tests to see what happens. Scientists have many questions about the world, so they have many tests to see what will happen if they do something. And we call that, another word for that test is called an, whoa, this is a really long word, experiment. Whew, so long, right? Experiment. So how many sounds? Experiment. 4 sounds. Experiment. Let's put them all together. Experiment. Experiment. So an experiment is specifically what a scientist, like a chemist, does to see what happens. It's a test, a type of test, a very specific type of test. There are many kinds of tests. You take a test in school. That's not an experiment. An experiment is when a scientist does something to see what will happen. That's an experiment. Okay, next one. Oh, this is a very interesting picture, isn't it? To choose. Now, it's important to choose wisely, right? You see this picture here. This person chose a hamburger. You see? This person chose an apple. You see? Very important to choose the right thing. Person who chose a hamburger is kind of fat, right? But this person who chose the apple they're slim. They're not so fat. They're in good shape. Okay? But you choose something. Another word to choose is to select. You select one thing or the other thing. Will you select a hamburger? Then you will look like me, right? If you select the apple, you'll look like I did 20 years ago. Okay? So, depending on what you choose, that's important. Depending on what you select, what will you select? Okay. Next one. A container for holding something. This is a container. There are many different kinds of containers that hold things, right? This is a special type of container. It holds water. It has a handle that you can carry it. We call this container a bucket. A bucket is usually used to carry water or sand or something else, and many buckets have a handle that you can carry it around with. Okay? Buckets are good for carrying heavy things, but we call this type of container a bucket. They're made of metal or plastic. So plastic bucket, metal bucket. This one's made of metal. Next one. Oh, what's he doing? It looks familiar. He's teaching, right? A university teacher. But he's not just a teacher, right? In your elementary school, your middle school, your high school, you can call those people teachers. But at a university, they have a special word for that type of teacher. They call them professor. 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 That's the word for a teacher who teaches at a university. You don't call your teacher in high school a professor, you just say teacher. But when you go to college or you go to university, then you say professor. Okay, next one. There's a group of people here. They look very surprised. To surprise someone greatly. Now, when you surprise someone greatly, especially it means you scare them a little bit, right? That means you shock them. Oh my gosh, oh, right? You say, oh, I am shocked, right? You surprise someone really a lot. To shock them. He shocked them. Okay, next one. Now she looks a little frustrated, right? Something that is wrong. Something, of course, with computers, many things go wrong, right? So we can say it is a mistake. Okay, hopefully she didn't make the mistake. Maybe the computer made the mistake. But anyway, something went wrong. Something wrong happened. It is a mistake. So it's a mistake. Okay, next one. To make it difficult for someone to think clearly. This person is buried under a lot of work, right? They have so many things to do. It's difficult for them to think clearly. They are confused. They don't know what to do. Should I do this job? Should I do this job? Well, the phone's ringing. My boss is calling me. I'm confused, right? To confuse. 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 I'm very confused. I don't know what to do. 11. Well, this guy's pretty smart, right? He's doing, what is he doing? Well, the study of numbers. He's figuring out how to not just add and subtract, but also multiply and divide. He's studying math. Did you hear what I said? Add, subtract. That's simple math, right? If you add and subtract, that's simple math. Add is like plus or minus. But I also said multiply, multiply, and divide. That's more difficult math, right? That's multiply, we usually use that symbol, and to divide, we use that symbol, okay? So, add, subtract, multiply, divide, this is all the study of math. And the type of math he's doing is algebra. This is algebra. Algebra. There are many types of math, right? There are many types of math. There's simple math, doing this. There's algebra. There's trigonometry. There's calculus. Ooh, calculus is very difficult, right? But algebra, probably you will study algebra. Maybe you're studying algebra now. By the way, isn't this picture a little strange? Think about it. He's writing, but he's writing backwards. He's writing backwards so you can see what he's writing. But if you look at the picture closely, you see, oh, there's something strange about the picture. By the way, it's also interesting to notice, I'm just getting onto some of these. B equals 2. If you do these problems work out. And if, I'll just give you the answer. A, what does A equal? A equals 5. Look at it later, okay? We're studying words now, but if you want to look at the math, A equals 5. Do it later. Okay. 12. Intelligent. Somebody who's intelligent, okay? What do we call them? We call them smart. Are you smart? Of course you're smart. You're studying with me, right? I'm sorry. You're studying with these textbooks. So you're smart, right? Because you're intelligent. If you know a lot of things, it's interesting to look at this word, intelligent and smart. Intelligent doesn't mean that you have a lot of knowledge. Intelligent means that you can learn quickly. You can learn the knowledge. There's a difference between being intelligent and being wise. If somebody is wise, that means they have a lot of experience and they know from life what to do. But somebody who's intelligent has the ability. Intelligent is like ability to learn. And if you're smart, you can learn quickly, okay? So that's interesting. 13, with no error. With no error, no mistakes. You got it perfectly or exactly. Exactly correct. That's like 맞습니다, 맞고요, right? That's like exactly perfect. Exactly right, right? No problems, no errors. Okay, next one. Why something happened. Oh no, it's too bad. She got an F. Aigo. There's some reason. What is the reason she got an F? The reason explains why something happened. We don't know, but we can think there are many reasons why she got an F. 1, she didn't sleep last night. 2, she didn't study. 3, she played a video game all night. There are many reasons why something happened. Many reasons why somebody would get an F. So I hope that doesn't happen to you. Make sure there is no reason for you to get an F. There should only be a reason for you to get an A. Okay. Number 15, to make a point in a test or a game. To make a point, or when you look at the points for both teams or for people, we're talking about the score. So when we use the word score, a very common question is, what is the score? So imagine Korea and Japan are playing a soccer game, right? And you want to know, what is the score? Then of course you say, well, Korea has 8 points and Japan has 0, right? That's the score. 8-0. 8-0. Okay? Maybe. Okay. What's the score? What are the points that each team got or each person got? That's the score. When we talk about the score, we usually talk about both teams. 8-0. Okay? Or you could say, what is your score on a test? Because it's also a test. My score was 89. That's pretty good, but it's better if your score is 100, right? Wow, that's a perfect score. So hopefully you get 100, okay? That would be a score on a test. Okay. The next word, to think that something is true. So if you think something is true, you believe in something. In this case, we have a picture of Santa Claus. Do you believe in Santa Claus? Of course, in that case, you think that Santa Claus is real, and it's true. That to believe something, to think that something is true, you believe in something. Okay? Okay, well, let's go over the vocabulary exercises. Exercise number 1. What is our directions? Complete each sentence with a word from the box. So we have 8 words in the box. We're going to have 8 sentences to fill in the blanks. Each sentence we have to choose which word goes into the blank for the sentence. We have a lot of words. What are they? Of course, these are words we just studied. The first one is discovered. Discovered. Remember, we studied the word discover, but now we're using it in the past tense. Discovered. Okay? Bucket. We learned singular bucket. More than one bucket is buckets. Buckets. Okay, next one. Repeat, to do over. Repeat, but this one is repeated. Repeated. Okay, next one. We learned shock, but remember we can say shocked. Shocked. Okay, next one. Experiment. Ooh, there's our really long word, right? Experiment. Experiment. Okay, next one. Switch. Switch. Okay, switch. That might be a little difficult with the SW. You exchange or you move one for the other. Switch. Select. Selected. Okay, selected. Selected. Next one, professor. Professor. Okay, those are the words. Let's see if we can put these into these sentences correctly. I hope so. Number one, he will beep the old bucket with a new one. So think about that. We have two things here, right? We have an old bucket, we have a new one. So we have two buckets. We have an old bucket and a new bucket. What are we going to do? We're going to take the old bucket, maybe throw it away, and we're going to use the new bucket. So what are we doing in this case, right? We're taking one, removing it, and putting another one in its place. So in that case, we are going to switch. Switch. He will switch the old bucket with a new one. And this is probably what you do in your life too. If you have something that's old or broken, you throw it away or you get rid of it and you put a new one instead. For example, batteries. You switch the battery in your phone. Don't throw away your old battery, recharge it. But maybe you have two batteries, so you switch them. The new battery for the old one. You recharge the old one. That's a good example. Switch batteries. 2. The beep wants to give the elephant a math test. Okay, that's an interesting sentence. That's part of the reading, by the way. Okay, so if somebody wants to give an elephant a math test, who would do that, right? Think about that. We need a person, right? The professor wants to give the elephant a math test. Basically, that's the only one that we can use here because professor is a person, right? And that's the only person we've got up here. So the professor wants to give the elephant a math test. Okay, number 2. The workers beep gold and diamonds in the cave. What do the workers do? There's gold and diamonds in a cave. What are they going to do with those things? Now, not all caves have gold and diamonds, too bad, right? If you go to a cave, there's probably not going to be gold and diamonds in there. But if you're looking around and say, oh, look, if you find the gold and diamonds there, what did you do? You discovered gold and diamonds in the cave. Okay, so discovered. They discovered gold and diamonds. They found gold and diamonds in the cave. Okay, the next one. They beep the same test 3 times. 3 times. They did it 3 times. Not just once, but they did it again and again and one more time again. Okay? So what word means that you do something not just once, but twice or 3 times or 4 times, right? What means that you do something more than once? That's this word right here, repeated. They repeated the same test 3 times. Okay, that's the word that makes sense there. Number 5. Fill the beep with water from the well. Okay. Remember we looked at this container that holds something, and it's usually, this container is made of metal or plastic, and of course I said you usually use it to carry water or sand or something that's heavy. What is it? What is that container that we use to carry stuff? There it is right there, bucket. Fill the buckets with water from the well. Okay? The next one, 6. The scientist is doing an what in the lab? What do scientists do? Remember before I talked about a scientist has many questions about the world. They want to make tests to see if the question is yes or no. Will this thing burn if I increase the temperature? That is what? That is an experiment. The scientist is doing an experiment in the lab. Okay? Our last two sentences. Ashiya. Ashiya is a name. It's the name of the elephant in the reading passage that we're going to read. Ashiya, beep, the one with more apples in it. So, if you've read the passage already, what did Ashiya the elephant do? Ashiya the elephant, right? There's one with more apples. So you think there's more than one, right? You've got one here, you've got one here. Maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4. In the reading they talk about just 2, but Ashiya is going to, right, take or pick, or what is she going to do? What is the elephant going to do? The elephant's going to select. Ashiya selected the one with more apples in it. Select, choose. Okay? Number 8, are you beep that an elephant can count? So, the fact that an elephant can count, that's really surprising, isn't it? That's really amazing. And it might be so surprising that, right, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, right? What means that? What word has something to do with something that you find out, that you discover, and it's really surprising, some really surprising information? What word has to do with that? Well, of course, shocked. Are you shocked that an elephant can count? Did you know that? That's really shocking news. That's amazing news. Okay, well, that wraps up the exercise for the vocabulary, and we've learned a lot of different words. So now we're going to use those. We're going to see those words in a reading passage. So we're going to take a short break, come back, and look at the reading passage. Okay, welcome back. We're going over the reading passage now. This story is about an elephant that can count. Pretty amazing, shocking even. Amazing story. So let's go over the first part together. Have you ever needed help with math? Who hasn't? The next time you need help, ask Ashiya the elephant. Ashiya counts very well. She also doesn't make many mistakes. Wow, that's pretty interesting information, right? So the first sentence we have here is actually a question. Sometimes writers will start a reading passage or what they write with a question to get you interested in the topic. And that's what this is about here. Have you ever needed help with math? That's kind of a common question. Of course, everybody has probably needed help with math at some time in their lives. But, so if you ever need help with math, the next time you need help, ask Ashiya the elephant. Why would you ask an elephant? Because Ashiya counts very well. That's our subject. So you see how the writer is getting you interested in the subject and then leading up to the topic of the reading passage, which is Ashiya the elephant. Ashiya is an elephant. And so we see that Ashiya counts very well. She also doesn't make many mistakes. Well, that's really amazing. An elephant that can count. And that's the subject of our reading passage, right? That's what the writer introduced into the reading passage by asking us a question and then introducing the subject. Okay, let's continue. Where is Ashiya? Okay, that's what's next. Let's go to Japan and learn more about how amazing Ashiya is. Ashiya lives at the Ueno Zoo. Is it right pronunciation? Ueno? I think so. I hope so. Ueno Zoo in Tokyo. Hai, wakarimashita. Okay? Okay, this is where it was discovered that Ashiya could do math. Okay, at the zoo. Of course, elephants don't normally live in Japan, right? But they live at the zoo, and in the Tokyo Zoo, there is an elephant, and that's where Ashiya lives. There are many elephants. So, let's go to Japan, because we have to go to the zoo where Ashiya lives. And we can learn more about how amazing Ashiya is in Japan. She lives at the Ueno Zoo in Tokyo. And it was at the zoo, this is where. When they say this and they follow it with is where, that means they're referring back to this zoo in Tokyo. The zoo in Tokyo is where it was discovered, okay, that Ashiya could do math. We do math. can you do math? Okay? We don't say, can you perform math, right? We say, can you do math? I can do math well. Okay? Next one. Many animals, not just elephants, can count things, but other animals can only count to about 3 or 4. Ashiya can count up to 7. She is a very smart elephant. So this part of the reading passage is telling us about how special Ashiya is. Because it says, yeah, many animals. It's not unusual for animals to count. Many animals can count. Not just elephants, right? So not just elephants can count, but many other animals. Maybe dogs can count. Maybe bears can count, right? Other types of animals can count. But other animals, those other animals, can only count to about 3 or 4. So it's not surprising that animals can count. Many animals can count, but they only count to 3 or 4. What makes Alicia special? She can count up to 7. That's really amazing because she's a very exceptional, special animal, right? So she is very smart. She's a very smart elephant. Most animals, only 3 or 4. But Ashiya, wow, she can go up to 7. That's very smart. Next one. Elephants can't talk, right? We can't communicate really with elephants by talking. So how do we know if Ashiya can really count? How do we know? We can't just give her a math test. Say, here you go, Ashiya, write the math test. Elephants, they make a mess of it. They probably step on it. Can we? Actually, that's exactly what happened. Oh, they did test her, but not like a written test. Interesting. So, in this passage, we find out how scientists figured out that Ashiya could actually count. So, how do we know? How do we know? 어떻게 알아요? Right? How do we know if she can really, 정말, count? Can she really count? Of course, we can't just give her a math test, can we? That's like a question that the writer's asking you to think about, like a situation that sounds absurd or ridiculous, right? If you give her a test, she can't write. She'd probably just step on it. It'd be very dirty. However, we think that, but actually, that's exactly what happened. I mean, they didn't give her a written test. They gave her some other type of test. Let's see. A university professor thought of the idea to test Ashiya using apples. The professor put 2 buckets in front of Ashiya. Ashiya couldn't see inside the buckets though. Okay? So what the professor is doing is kind of an experiment, right? He's testing to see if the elephant can actually count, because we want to know. So, who thought of the idea? If you have an idea, somebody has to think of the idea first. Who was it? It was the university professor. He thought of an idea to test Ashiya. How can we test this elephant? Well, they put 2 buckets in front of the elephant, but the elephant cannot see inside the buckets. So what's next? She could only see if things were dropped inside of them. She could only see the things that were dropped inside. The workers slowly put 5 apples into one of the buckets. One by one, they dropped in the apples. So they have 2 buckets. In one bucket, they slowly dropped the apples. So she could see the apples. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She could see that. So they slowly dropped in the apples, dropped the apples in the bucket. Now there's the second bucket. In the second bucket, they put in 7 apples. If Ashiya really can count, then she will pick the bucket with more apples. The workers repeated the experiment many times. Okay, so up to here, that's describing the experiment, how they managed the experiment. One bucket, they put 5 apples. The other bucket, they dropped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the elephant could see them dropping the apples in the bucket, but she couldn't see inside the bucket. So the idea is if the elephant could find out the difference between 5 and 7, right? So if Ashiya really could count, then she'll choose. She will select the bucket with more apples. That's obvious if she can know how to count. So they did it once, but they did it many times. Repeat the experiment many times. That's important. If you only do the experience once, maybe the elephant gets lucky. Or twice, maybe the elephant got lucky 2 times. But if you do the experiment 50 times, then it doesn't depend on luck anymore. It means the elephant is really counting. That's why many scientists will repeat their experiment many times. Oh, too fast. Sometimes, not just repeat the experiment, but sometimes they would even switch the buckets. They were trying to confuse Ashiya. But even so, Ashiya almost always selected the basket with more apples. She scored an 87% on her math test. There could be only one reason for this. Okay. So this passage tells us more about the experiment and about how it proved that Ashiya could actually count. So this one says sometimes they would even switch the buckets. So this is the bucket they put 5 apples. This bucket they put 7 apples. Sometimes they would switch the buckets. The elephant could see they're moving the buckets, but the elephant remembered which bucket had 7 apples in it. So even though they switched it, right, they were trying to confuse the elephant, but even though they tried to confuse Ashiya, she almost always, that doesn't mean 100% of the time, but most of the time, she picked the basket with more apples. She scored an 87%. What that means is that 87% of the time, she picked the right basket. Now, remember I talked about luck before? If you do an experiment many times and somebody's lucky, maybe they get it 50% of the time. Maybe that's average. But 87% is a lot more. That means Ashiya knew what she was doing most of the time. She's smart. She's going to score much more than 50%, which is just the random chance, right, of choosing the right bucket from 2. So she got 87% on her math test. It's kind of like a math test. Don't you wish we could take math tests like that? Choose the right bucket? No, our math tests are much more difficult, but of course we're much smarter than elephants. Okay, but anyway, there could be only one reason for this. There's only one reason why she got 87%. There's only one reason. What is it? Ashiya must have been counting the apples as they were dropped into the bucket. Okay, that's the reason. Must have been. You are thinking about a reason. Remember, we studied that word reason. The reason is the explanation or why something happened. And if you look at something that happened and you say there's only one reason, we can use must have been. She must have been doing this. That's the only explanation, the only reason. There's only one reason why this happened. It must have been. Okay, you're talking about something that happened in the past. It's past tense. Ashiya must have been counting. That's the only reason that she chose those apples, the right bucket, 87% of the time. She must have been counting the apples as they were dropped into the bucket. As they were being dropped at that time, she must have been counting them. That's the only reason, the only explanation. She must also know that 7 apples are more than 5 apples. Everyone was shocked. They couldn't believe that an elephant could do math. So that's the rest of this passage here. So she must also know, that means that it's also true all the time. She must also know, we must assume that, 7 apples more than 5. So if somebody can count, they obviously know that 7 is more than 5, right? And this is amazing. Most animals don't count past 3 or 4. But Ashiya knew the difference between 7 and 5. So that's really amazing. Everyone was shocked. Wow, that's a really surprising information. They couldn't believe. So if you say somebody is shocked, it's the same as saying they can't believe something. Well, I can't believe it. It's true, but it's really hard to believe it, right? That means you're shocked by the information. That an elephant can do math. It's very shocking to think that an elephant can do math. Okay, let's go over the reading comprehension questions. This story is about what? It's about an elephant who can do math, right? So let's take a look at these answers. This story is about a talking elephant. A talking elephant? That would be really shocking. But that wasn't what this passage was about. Ashiya can't talk, so, she didn't say, she wasn't going, as they were driving the apples, she wasn't saying 1, 2. No, that would be really shocking, wouldn't it? So it's not about a talking elephant. This story is about counting animals. Be careful here. If you say this story is about counting animals, it means the story is about people who count animals, or maybe how they count animals, or what techniques they use to count a certain number of animals in a field. You say this story is about counting animals, that story is about maybe a farmer or a scientist who goes out and says, okay, I'm going to count the number of buffalo on this field, right? But that's not what this story is about. It's not about how to count animals or ways to count animals. That's not it. This story is about a counting elephant. Okay, here we have a and elephant, an elephant who can count. That's what the story is about, isn't it? That's what this means. A counting elephant. It's the same as saying an elephant. An elephant. And we have our name, so we're going to call her who can count. An elephant that or who can count. An elephant that can count, an elephant who can count. That's what this means. And that's true. This story is about Ashiya, the elephant who can count. An elephant who can count. Not D, again, reading. The elephant can't read, right? It can count. So the answer is, this story is about a counting elephant. An elephant that can count. Okay, next one. Number 2. Sometimes workers would beep to confuse Ashiya. So this sentence has to do with the experiment that they used to figure out if the elephant could actually count. Sometimes workers would do what to confuse Alicia? They would move the buckets around, right? They would A, make loud noises. No, the story didn't say anything about making loud noises. They would paint the buckets. No, it didn't say anything about painting the buckets, although that's an interesting idea. You could paint one bucket blue and one bucket red, okay? Sometimes the workers would cover the elephant's eyes. No, didn't say anything about that in the story. Sometimes the workers would switch the buckets, move the buckets around. 5 apples, 7 apples, switch the buckets, right? Switch them. That's what the story said. Sometimes the workers would switch the buckets to try to confuse her. So that's the answer. Sometimes workers would switch the buckets to confuse Ashiya. Okay. Number 3. Some animals can count beep, but Ashiya can count up to 7. So remember what we talked about? We saw in the passage that it's not unusual. It's common for animals to count. Many animals can count, but they can only count what? What makes Ashiya special? She can count up to 7. Some animals can count what? Up to 15? Up to 15? So animals can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15? No, that would be really amazing. And that means Ashiya is not special because 7 is less than 15. So that's not what it was about. Some animals can count up to 7, but Ashiya can count up to 7. That wouldn't make much sense because but means not the same, opposite. But if you're saying 7 and 7, that's the same. That doesn't make sense either. And that's not what the reading passage said anyway. Some animals can count up to 3 or 4, but Ashiya can count up to 7. That's what the reading passage said, right? It said many animals can count up to 3 or 4. That's not unusual, right? What makes Ashiya special or unusual? She can count up to 7. Okay. D, up to 8. No, that's not right. It's up to 3 or 4 is the right answer, but not up to 8 because, again, Ashiya wouldn't be special. So the right answer, some animals can count up to 3 or 4, but Ashiya can count up to 7. That's the right answer. That's what makes her special. Number 4, during the experiment. So during the experiment, Ashiya almost always picked the bucket. Which bucket? There are 2 buckets, right? One with 5 apples, one with 7 apples. Which bucket did she almost always pick? She picked the bucket which had more apples, okay? 5 apples or 7 apples? Which bucket did she usually pick? She picked the bucket that had 7 apples. That's more apples. So A is the right answer, which had more apples. Okay, let's just do the other ones. She picked the bucket which was bigger. Well, the reading passage didn't say anything about the size of the buckets, just what was in the bucket. So the buckets were the same size, actually. C, she picked the bucket which had less apples. No, that would mean that she can't count because, of course, she wants more apples, right? She didn't pick the bucket with 5 apples. She picked the bucket with 7 apples. D, she picked the bucket which was smaller. Again, B and D are very similar, right? No, they're both wrong because the reading passage didn't say anything about the size. Didn't say one bucket was bigger than the other bucket or one bucket was smaller, which is really the same thing. It didn't say anything about those. So B and D are wrong because those have to do with size. We're not talking about size, we're talking about quantity, how much, right? So, and she picked the bucket that had more apples, so that's the right answer. During the experiment, Ashiya almost always, 87% of the time, picked the bucket which had more apples. And that's the right answer. Okay, there's Ashiya there, right? Very interesting picture. Of course, it's from the Tokyo Zoo. This is where she lives. What can we say about Ashiya? Well, Ashiya lives at the Ueno Zoo in Tokyo. I hope that's right. Okay. Hi! Okay. Okay, so she lives at the Ueno Zoo in Tokyo. A university professor thought of the idea to test Ashiya using apples. So maybe somebody noticed that this elephant seemed to know how many things there were, you know, and so they knew that the elephant could count. A university professor wanted to make sure that she actually could count. So thought of an idea how to test her. So Ashiya must also know that 7 apples are more than 5 apples after they did the experiment. So it's a pretty amazing elephant, isn't it? In this lesson, we learned about an elephant that can count up to 7. And that's unusual because, as we saw in the reading passage, animals usually only count to 3 or 4. But here's an elephant that can count to 7. So, like the reading passage said, if you ever have trouble with your math homework, next time, ask the elephant. But maybe that's not so good because probably your math homework is a little harder than counting up to 7. Anyway, hope you've learned a lot. This is a very interesting story to look at. A very amazing thing about animals in the world that we live in. So anyway, that wraps it up for this lesson. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.